All right, let's get going here. Welcome to everybody who is joining us today. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Johanna, for joining us and agreeing to be our first speaker for 2024. Very happy to have you. And just pulling up here, one moment. All right. Perfect. So our Wisdom with Women speaker series was founded at the beginning of the pandemic. So we're entering our 4th year of doing Wisdom with Women with the goal to have quality women speakers from our local community speak to our community about different topics, financial topics, end-of-life topics, estate planning, tax, financial, and just span the range of financial planning and life topics. So thank you for joining. We have a wonderful speaker here today. My name is Allie Kemp with Financial Insights. For those of you who don't know me, just coming back from a maternity leave, I'm a new mom, so I'm happy that this is my first event doing Financial Insights for this year. And let me introduce Johanna. We have a wonderful speaker today. She'll speak, and then you'll be able to unmute and ask questions as Johanna sees fit. And at the end, I think we'll have a Q&A, so feel free to stick around. Johanna Munson is a peace of mind guide and an end-of-life educator, speaker, and workshop leader who has a passion for expanding the conversations around how we live our lives fully until the end. She developed the End-of-Life Peace Plan program, which is a comprehensive roadmap covering the heart, soul, and mind of advanced care planning. In creating the signature program, she drew from her experiences as a lifelong educator and from accompanying her parents through their aging years. She has completed certifications as conversational intelligence coach, a death doula, and a licensed Willow end-of-life educator. When she's not getting people to talk about the things they'd rather avoid, Johanna can be found taking walks with friends, digging in her garden, taking online classes, and going contra dancing, which is kind of like square dancing. Her 2 children have flown the nest, so no grandchildren yet. She lives on Bainbridge Island, and she's so happy that Zoom was invented so she can connect with people in other parts of the world. So we want to give you a nice Financial Insights welcome to our first Wisdom with Women Speakers series, Johanna. A pleasure to have you. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such an honor to join this wonderful collection of women who know a lot about things. And so I'm very, very pleased to be able to share my wisdom, which happens to be in the field of end-of-life planning. This is sacred work that we are doing. And so in honor of that, I like to just go ahead and light a candle. And I do this in honor of all those who have come before us, who knew how to do this work, and to honor you for being here and being willing to do this with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started on my presentation. All right, so as I said, it's an honor to be here today, and thank you, Allie, for that introduction, and thank you to the Financial Insights team for asking me to speak today and share my passion. So one thing we all have in common is that we are mortal beings. Yeah, some people get away without paying taxes, but no one gets out of here alive. So if I asked you what it means to create peace of mind around end of life, what would you think of? Maybe you bring to mind the death of a family member or that of a friend, and you'd consider how that experience went and how you feel about it now. Those experiences can be quite traumatic, especially in what I'll call dominant white Eurocentric culture, where we don't even really want to talk about dying or use the term death. Dying has been medicalized to an incredible degree. And so we squander this opportunity to really experience the powerful transformation that happens as we near the end of our life and then leave our body. We use euphemisms such as pushing up daisies or kicked the bucket instead of accepting the reality of our mortality and creating meaning from that. So today, I'd like to explore this liminal space with you, looking at what's possible when you go beyond what I consider the basics. So just to note, I am an educator and a coach, and I do not hold any professional license such as that of a lawyer, financial advisor, or physician. This presentation is meant to open your heart and mind to what is possible when we talk about the things that really matter to us. So here's a quick overview of today's presentation, and as Ali mentioned, there will be time for questions at the end. First, I'll share what I consider the basics of estate planning, or end-of-life planning, as I prefer to call it. And these are the mind items such as wills and advance directives. Then we'll go beyond those basics to the heart and soul of end-of-life planning, and you'll see where you personally are in this process with a quick assessment. There's often resistance to talking about topics such as dying and death, so I'll give you an outline you can use for any challenging conversation. And finally, I'll share next steps and some resources. First, I'd like to tell a little of my story, as I think it helps to understand why I am so passionate about you creating an end-of-life roadmap for you and your loved ones to follow. So I'll start with my mom, who was the kind of person who made a list each week and got it done. Wish I could be like that, but yeah, that was her mode. But in May of 2007, suddenly she was getting tired all the time and was diagnosed with acute leukemia. Needless to say, that was a huge shock. She and my dad did have a will, but we never have had any conversations regarding her wishes, what would bring her comfort, never talked about an advance directive. She was a hospice volunteer, so you'd think we might have had some of these conversations, but no. Her mom had lived until age 91, so of course we assumed that she would live at least that long. So in those 5 weeks that she was in the hospital, my dad was in shock, my sisters and I disagreed about what she would have wanted and what was possible. I believe she would have wanted to come back to Bainbridge Island to live out her last days. And I still imagine her being able to gaze out on her beloved garden during her last days, but she got too weak and ended up in the intensive care unit. From there, she was moved to a room on the hospice floor where she took her last breath. We were all just absolutely devastated, and it's taken me years to get over the guilt and regrets. So we thought our dad might not live long without his beloved wife, but he ended up living 11 and a half more years and died in 2019. He did update his will to make us 3 daughters his beneficiaries, but didn't do an advance directive at that time. He started bringing up end-of-life topics, though, within a couple of years. But even at that point, my mom's death was too fresh, and I wasn't ready to consider his end of life. But a few more years passed, and things started happening. He had to stop riding his bike around the island, then had to give up driving. And about that time, I realized it was really important for us to be able to have these honest and open conversations. He and I had always been very close, so it was not a huge stretch to do this. As the next few years passed, it was wonderful and, of course, challenging to be by his side as he aged. We did the advance directive and some other useful documents that I'll talk about. Eventually, I took over both powers of attorney, medical and financial, and started going to all his doctor's appointments and managing his finances. I was very open with my sisters about what was going on, and they both trusted me and knew that they couldn't take on those roles themselves, so it worked out, which I realize is not always the case. In the fall of 2018, he was wheelchair bound. He had severe pain in his legs from sciatica. He had Parkinson's, and that had advanced. And he knew he wasn't as clear mentally, which was very important to him. He had been a research scientist in the field of neurophysiology at the University of Florida and had retired out here to Bainbridge Island. And so he had a bad fall, and after that, he agreed to go on hospice. And hospice is not a like, that's it, you're done kind of thing. He actually lived for 4 pretty good months on hospice. So we were very glad that we had that support in place, because in February, he realized that he was no longer experiencing the quality of life that he wanted. He had established some markers, and when he reached that point, he had decided that he would voluntarily stop eating and drinking. We talked this plan through beforehand with my sisters and with the staff and with his doctors. He was in assisted living at that point, and so he had somebody around 24 hours a day. And as I said, he was already on hospice, so he had the pain and anti-anxiety medications that would ease the process. And the whole thing only took a week from when he stopped eating to when he passed. And the big difference is the conversations. I have only a few regrets about that final week, and to this day, I don't experience any guilt. So that contrast between how I feel about the deaths of my parents is what inspired me to make this field my life's work. I've come up with 3 principles for the work I do with individuals and families. First, get educated. Explore the full scope of possibilities for making the most of the sacred transition that we will all experience. I have a thorough checklist that is part of my end-of-life peace plan program. And then you got to make the decisions. Based on these explorations, it's things you've learned, decide what you want and make sure that those wishes are put down in writing. And most important, talk about it, have those conversations. And the end result is that everyone will experience peace of mind. So thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope you can feel the amazingly positive impact of my dad's insistence on getting his plan in place. And here are the basics of that plan. So we start with a will or trust to make sure your possessions go to whom you want. Part of that will be a durable power of attorney. That's someone who can manage your finances if or when you can no longer do that. And then there's an estate executor who will make sure your will or trust is followed after your death. Another important document is what's called an advance directive or a living will. You only need one of those, you don't need both. And within the advance directive will be a medical power of attorney or a healthcare agent. And the advance directive only goes into place when you're incapacitated. And so having a healthcare agent, that person will be able to make sure your wishes are followed in the event that you are unable to communicate. An estate attorney will often include this form, the advance directive, in their package, but you don't actually need an attorney for this document. The End of Life Washington website has a very thorough form that includes HIPAA release and funeral wishes, and that's free on their website, endoflifewa.org. And then, of course, you need a financial plan in place, and that's where financial insights come in. The plan for retirement, housing, medical needs, any other considerations, and making sure that those basics are covered is really important. So there are a couple more things that I consider basic. One major one is to make sure your information is easily accessible to someone, not just for end of life, but as I mentioned, also for cases of incapacitation. I like this planner, but there are so many out there. This one has 16 tabs that cover everything from your important data, who to contact, all your financial accounts, including how bills are paid. Some might be on auto pay, some we don't write checks so much anymore, but your parents might. And then make a plan for who will take care of your pets and who will take over any social media accounts. Now, I don't suggest leaving this out on your coffee table, obviously, but it can be a lifesaver in the event of an emergency. The second basic item that is often overlooked is sharing these documents with those who need to know. You spend all that time and effort and money getting your documents done, and then put them in a drawer and forget about them. Or maybe your will goes in your safe deposit box at the bank, but no one knows where the key is. And that can cause a major delay in getting access to it. So I realize that there can be complicated situations, like having to choose one adult child over another for one of those important roles. You might be in a blended family, situations where there are no close family members. So that's part of what we will cover if we work together. And it's, we'll address how to have these conversations after we look at the heart and soul of planning. And, this is not a one and done situation. So all of these documents need to be reviewed at least every 5 years. and especially if a major life event happens, such as marriage, birth or adoption, divorce, remarriage, you receive an inheritance, or experience a major illness. So this is an ongoing process. So the mind tests are mostly focused on times when you're incapacitated and or near death and after death. But what about right now? So if you're planning while you have the luxury of time and mental capacity, you likely have at least a decade and maybe as many as 4 or 5 decades to consider. And so I call this span of time your arc of life, the years from now until the end of your life. So for this time, we want to think about who and what really matter. We want to get the mind tests in place, the basics, but we can go deeper and explore the heart and soul of who we are too. After all, we're human beings, not human doings. So what are some of the heart topics? I like to start with new clients by learning about who and what matter most to you. I've had clients decide they can retire because they did this work, because that's what really mattered to them. And others have set boundaries around volunteer work so they have more time for family. And think about your legacy, not financial, but how you want to be remembered. And you can take steps to make sure that's in place. One couple I worked with had teenage daughters. And through this process, they realized that they were all so busy that they were losing touch with each other as partners. And they made some major commitments to make sure that their marriage lasted well into their empty nesting years. And what does quality of life mean? Well, that's about what makes life worth living to you. My dad initially said that if he had to use a wheelchair, that was it. He was done. And so he did have to use a walker at one point, but then his legs got so weak that it was no longer safe for him to walk, even just with that walker. So we use another form from End of Life Washington called the Values Worksheet, and that allows you to establish the markers that really represent what quality of life means to you. And he decided that he would, even though he had to go in a wheelchair, that he still was willing to continue living. And so he ended up living the last year in a wheelchair, having to use a wheelchair. He was able to get himself around, and I can still picture him, out in the parking lot, just going around the parking lot, making sure he got his laps in, because being physically active was one of his super important markers for quality of life. And yeah, we made many more great memories in that year. Another heart topic is what brings you comfort. Things like who would you want around you or not in challenging times. I've had clients who describe their hoped for deathbed scene down to what music they'd want to hear and that they'd love to have candles lit. There's no guarantee this will be possible, of course, but imagine how wonderful this kind of guidance is for family and friends who will be there. And then there's creating a dementia directive. This is a whole nother major topic. Even though a dementia directive is a form that you fill in, I put this in the heart section rather than the mind one, as it impacts your relationships in so many ways. And relationships to me are under the heart category. And last, there's what I call your circle of caring or social network. Those around you, including friends and family, as well as access to services you need. Ever since the pandemic, isolation has become more widespread, even though we're back to doing a lot of things in person at this point. Loneliness has become an epidemic in its own right. So looking at how to connect is key to living out your arc of life with connection and meaning. So purpose and legacy is what the heart topics address, but soul topics take us to the next level in terms of getting comfortable with what I call the reality of our mortality. As I said before, no one makes it out of here alive. It's an opportunity to examine how loss has impacted our life, and it's not just losing people. We experience endings in many arenas: relationships, jobs, homes, and more. Avoiding looking at this arena can put roadblocks in our way that mean we can't make the most of the life we are living now. we can identify where we are not in alignment with our highest selves and take steps to heal in whatever way is possible. Sometimes we just have to let things go. There's a lot of letting go of things as we age, and ego and possessions are two of the biggest. Part of what's in the way may be unresolved conflicts. One of the biggest deathbed regrets is not taking steps to clear the air, resolve relationships, reconnect with people, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And last but not least, two of my favorite topics. By spiritual, I mean the absolute miracle of being alive in this moment and reconciling that with the fact that one day you will no longer inhabit your body. Have you considered what you want done with that body when you no longer need it? There are several new eco-conscious options, such as green burial, terramation, and aquamation, in addition to traditional burial and cremation. There are varying religious beliefs about afterlife, and I'm not out to convince anyone differently or to challenge them. Since I started doing this work, however, I have experienced communication from loved ones, both mine and those of others, from across the veil. I know mediumship is not something we talk about every day, but it doesn't surprise me that spirits want to reassure their loved ones that they're okay. Hearing from them can alleviate fear in amazingly beautiful ways. That's something to consider. So that was a lot to take in. Let's pause and just take a deep breath in. Blow it out. Let your shoulders drop as you breathe out and shake your hands a bit. Okay. So now we're going to do a quick assessment to see where you are in these three categories, and no worries, no judgment. So first, the mind items. Give yourself a point if you have your will or trust done, and that will come with a durable power of attorney and an estate executor. Add another point if you have your advance directive in place. Do you have your information in shareable format? That's another point. And probably most important, do you have conversations on these topics? So total 4 points possible here. Next is the heart category. Have you identified who and what matter most to you? 1 point for that. How's your legacy going? If someone asked you what that is, would you be able to answer? Another possible point. And do you know what makes life worth living to you? This can change over time, of course. So add a point if you know what that means right now. And how's your circle of caring? This one you can add a half point if you've got some network in place, but could use more. If you have a full circle, go ahead and add that point. Okay, how are you doing? There's a possible 8 points now. And finally, the soul aspects. Have you examined your relationship to loss? Give yourself a point for that. How about addressing unresolved issues? This is another ongoing one. So give yourself a point, even if you've just recently cleared some energetic space. Are you curious about what comes next? Just being open deserves a point. And if you are finding ways to truly be present in your life right now, that's the final point. So, like I said, no judgment. This is just an opportunity. So what do you see? I'd say if you scored in the 1 to 4 point range, you're probably avoiding this topic. If you are in the 5 to 7 point range, you probably survived some major trauma. And it's important to recognize that and to get therapy or get coaching. If you're in the embracer range, 8 to 11 points, that's great. It's really fun to see what happens as we take on this work. And if you got all 12, wow, you are thriving. So, great way to develop your points or add to your skills is to know how to handle uncomfortable conversations. Whether these conversations are around end-of-life choices or another topic, I'd like to share this step-by-step process with you that you can use today. So first, before you even start the conversation, it's important to reflect on what you hope to get from your talk. So by setting an intention for yourself and the conversation, that will make a big difference in how the conversation goes. So take a moment and think about the person you want to talk with and the impact it might have on your relationship. What possibilities might it create? It could be to share your own choices about end of life so that you're sure they can follow through as your medical power of attorney, for example. You'd feel comfortable with them in that role if you knew they were willing to support what you stated you want. Next, think about your concerns. It may seem kind of strange to bring up concerns before the main topic, but when you anticipate that the conversation will be challenging, simply stating something you're worried about before you start almost always reduces the tension for all parties. Can you imagine how the other person will react when you talk to them about your chosen topic? What might they think or feel? You might start with, I have something I want to talk with you about, but I'm worried you'll find it depressing. Then you can set the context. This is a great way to bring up a topic such as end of life that many people don't want to talk about and also doesn't tend to come up naturally in conversation. So let your person know what events in your life motivated you to want to think about your own mortality and or do some end of life planning. For example, you can refer to someone's death. When so-and-so died, I found it really peaceful or beautiful that they stated that they wanted a special blanket on their bed. Or refer to your own experience. When I lost my mom, I just was in grief forever. And so I really want to talk about these things ahead of time. That's something we hadn't done. So that helps the listener understand that it's not just a spur of the moment thing. You've really put some thought into this conversation. So those are the first 3 steps: set intention, identify your concerns, and create the context. So just a few more steps, and this will really make a huge difference, like I said, for any challenging topic. Next, share why you want to have the conversation in the first place, or your motivation. It's tempting to want to jump to what you want to talk about without explaining the motivation behind the conversation. I think it's fair to say that people are motivated to talk about end-of-life planning, either because of the positive benefits that result from doing so, or the negative consequences of not doing so. So a positive motivator might be that we'll understand each other's wishes better. And a negative one could be there'll be unnecessary conflict among family members. Okay, so you've done all this preparation. Now you want to set aside time to actually have the conversation. Sometimes it's good to have an initial talk saying you have something you'd like to talk about. No one likes to be blindsided. I suggest taking a drive somewhere and talking in the car. If you have teenagers or you had teenagers, often the best conversations would happen when you were sitting side by side. Or you might take a walk, and that can take the formality out of just sitting down at a table and having this kind of conversation. So after you have the conversation, no matter how well it went or how challenging it was, take some time to reflect on how you feel at that point. Acknowledge what went well and what went right. Think about what you would do differently next time. Was there a turning point or an aha moment? Reflecting will make it easier to plan for the next conversation. And this is an ongoing process, of course. So that was a very quick overview of handling these kinds of conversations. And I actually have a full 2-hour workshop on this process, so maybe another time. And so let's go ahead and talk now about next steps that you can take for your own plans. So in the case of the mind tasks, I highly recommend working with a personal estate attorney if you don't have a will in place. It's you can ask your friends, ask other professionals that you work with. There's a website called avo.com, and they have ratings for lawyers, and you can search by your area. And of course, getting an advance directive in place. The End of Life Washington website is there for Washington residents. And if you're in a different state, the compassionandchoices.org has both the values worksheet and the end of life or the advance directive. So if you have that in place already, this is a good nudge to review it and update it if needed. Sometimes you move, or your people who are your powers of attorney move, and you have to choose new people. And get some sort of information management. That planner that I showed you is one option. There are many more available. And most important, that's why this is in bold, share those documents with those who need to know. Next steps in the heart category. I invite you to reflect on your values. If you haven't done that exercise, you can find lists of values online and just choose the ones that really matter to you. Some of mine are connection and spirituality. And so everything I do, I can relate back to those values. And then think about your life story. If you need to expand your circle of caring, do that. I know it's can be hard as we grow older. Friends leave and die and move, and family members do the same. But it's so important to stay connected as we go through our later years. And then determine what quality of life means to you. That's the worksheet, the values worksheet I was talking about. And establish those markers. And then consider a dementia directive, and you can just search for that online. There's a dementiadirective.org. I think they have a really simple one that you can do. End of Life Washington has a very complicated one you can do. And then in the soul category, as I said, this is one of my favorite areas to work with clients in. Consider doing some spiritual exploration. You can journal, talk, look for information. There's so many online classes now that you can sign up for and explore this field. And where you're not experiencing peace, decide that you're going to take some action. Have those conversations, right? Life is unpredictable. We don't know if we're going to have another chance to talk to that special person. And if you're curious about all these things, I do have a Facebook group called the End of Life Lounge. And you're welcome to look for that if you're on Facebook. And I share lots of aspects of the things that I've addressed today. So that is the end of my presentation, but I'd love to connect with you. That's my cell phone number for business and my email. I have a free 30-minute connection call that we can do called Get Your Questions Answered. And there's my website, johannamunson.com, where you'll find out more about my comprehensive program called the End of Life Peace Plan. All right, I look forward to hearing your
and Johanna,
question.
it does look like we have a question from Amanda.
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and wanted to close by thanking you for listening and sharing this time, and then we'll get to the questions. Okay, great. I'm ready for questions.
All right, and you guys, you could go ahead and chime in, or you could put the questions in your question and answer, and we'll read them off, whatever is most comfortable for you all. But Amanda says, my grandma keeps her will in the fridge because she figures someone will find it when they are cleaning it out. Where's the best place to store your estate documents?
Great question. Yeah, so refrigerator is actually a good place because in the event of a fire, it's less likely to get burned up. So it's really important to have those documents in a fireproof bag. I have a go bag that I got off of Amazon, and I keep a copy of my will. Usually the lawyer will keep the original, so you don't have to necessarily worry about that. But I have my advance directive. I have all my legal documents from my life. I have a change of clothes. I have water and food. So it's, we live in earthquake country, and you never know when you might need to leave the house quickly.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions? So what you would recommend potentially keeping a will in your fridge?
It's not a bad place.
Okay, I've
Yeah,
never thought about that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, the original is what you need at the time of death. but you can make copies and make sure that several people have a copy of it. And so if you are the estate executor, then it's a great idea for you to have a copy. The original would probably, she should make sure the lawyer is still around and has that. Or if not, that she gets the original and has that ready, because you can always work with a different lawyer at the time it's needed.
All right, any other questions?
How do I, okay, just, yeah.
All right, Dorothy.
So, Johanna, thanks very much. I had never really heard of a dementia directive.
Yes, I'd
That-
love to share
uh,
more about that.
Yeah, I had, advanced directive, yeah, but not the dementia directive. So I'm going to check that out. So thanks very much for mentioning that.
Yeah, they are pretty recent development, actually. And obviously more and more people are living with dementia. The cost of caring for someone in a dementia facility is outrageous. It's like
Huge.
12,000 a month. And, for some people, they want to live as long as possible. And if they're financially able to do that, then, I have no argument with that. But for me, if I am unable to recognize my family, if I'm unable to get out and do things in nature, I've set my markers for what would mean I'm not experiencing the quality of life. And so the thing that they often do, so even if you don't want to do something like decide to stop eating and drinking, while you still have some capacity, and I do know someone who chose to do that. Her mother had early onset and she was experiencing a lot of symptoms. And so she and her daughter did like a bucket list of things for a year, and then she decided it was time. She had a celebration of life, and then she decided to stop eating and drinking and had hospice support, and it's a major process. But you can do a basic dementia directive, and that's the one on dementiadirective.org. And that has mild dementia, moderate, and severe dementia. And you just set what you kind of care you would want. So you can have all treatment possible. You can do only comfort care, or you can say, yeah, that's it. Don't try to force me to eat and drink, because a lot of times in facilities, they will just keep people alive if they put a can of Ensure in front of you and you agree to drink that, then you're not going to you're going to extend your life, but not necessarily quality of life.
So I'm going to ask a question that someone hasn't directly asked me this, but someone who has Alzheimer's now and is far, far, far down the road and not cognitive, but the wife has power of attorney for them, which includes the medical directive.
Right.
Does anyone ever ask you that question in terms of their ability to choose the road that their spouse that has the Alzheimer's? Am I making
well,
myself?
there are two situations there. One is if the spouse who's who is the power of attorney knows that they would not want to be alive at that point. It's not like you're going to withhold food or drink, but
Right.
as bodies shut down, we naturally just don't want to take in food or drink at some point. And, it's so hard on us as family members, because food is love, right? We want to support our person, to show them that we care. When the thing that might really show they care, if they've indicated that they don't want to live under those conditions, would be to get them on hospice, to get them pain and anti-anxiety medications in place, and just see where it goes if the patient themselves decides to stop. So that's one situation. a more difficult situation is if somebody put that kind of decision in their advance directive and the power of attorney doesn't agree. And so they continue to push food and water on them. And, you know, the patient obviously can't do anything. They may not even be aware. So it may be an okay situation. But also dementia can be really, really difficult. People can get physically aggressive. They can go through all kinds of pretty horrifying situations. And so being forced to continue to exist in that state is not a pleasant thing to contemplate. But the power of attorney, you know, you gave them that power. So
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah.
We have a question from Cecilia about, will we have a video recording of this presentation? It was very well delivered. Would like to share it with a friend. Yes, we will. That should be available by the end of this week, and we'll send it out to everyone who participated. And please feel free to share with your family or friends. Another comment from Cecilia, again, thank you. Great question about dementia care directives. Had not thought about this, thanks. And then from Molly, opening this conversation with an older loved one is so difficult. Suggestions for starting that conversation.
Yeah, so that back to the section on having difficult conversations, think of that context. I've, you know, think about, do you remember when Uncle Charlie died and he didn't have anything in place, and how hard that was on his wife and on you as a sibling? You know, I don't want to have to go through that when the time comes for you. And you can use those euphemisms with, I know they're generational differences in how comfortable we are speaking about these topics. So if, you know, you can't say death and dying out loud, I understand. But yeah, just, you know, relate it to something that maybe they've experienced or that you've experienced. And, you know, you can do tiny bites. You don't have to have a whole huge, big conversation.
All right, any other questions? I have someone raise their hand. Give me 1 second. Kathy.
Yes,
All right, are you able to? Let's see. If you could type the question or answer below, unless you
Is it
Can I
Kathy?
mute?
Are you looking at Kathy?
yeah.
Okay. Hi, Kathy. I'm gonna, Kathy, you're unmuted, so you can talk and we should be able to hear your question.
okay. It's not actually a question. I just wanted to share that I had recently found something that I'm finding helpful in the organizational part of this.
Right.
It's called Knockbox.
Yes, right. Next of kin. Mhm.
Yeah, and you can choose the level of things that you request, but comes with a packet of like one sheet for every key issue, many of which you discussed today, of course, and it's a great coverage. And I find it really handy to have a one sheet that you can fill in on for next of kin. They go all the way from selling the box itself with everything with it for, you know, more money. I just got the basic package that has all the documents, you know, one sheet at a time, although there's quite a few sheets.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, but it's still, I was sharing it with my brother, and they thought it was a great idea because it really is get the basics down in a file folder and a fireproof box, and it just organizes. You don't have to do all the thinking. It does it for you.
Right, yeah, and that's why I developed the checklist that I use, and you know, we go deeper into the conversations and the emotional and spiritual aspects, but yes, getting the basics done with something like the knockbox is a great place to start.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's NOKBOX.
Yes, right.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Are there any other questions? Feel free to unmute and ask your question directly, or raise your hand, or like Jordan was saying, you can type it into the Q&A box on the bottom. Okay, I'm not seeing any.
Oh, Ally, I'm gonna,
Oh, there we
Um,
go.
Dorothy again, along the same lines as, what is it called? Knockbox? How do you spell that again?
NOKBOX. It stands for next of kin box.
Oh, okay. Along those same lines, you can find online, and we've used it in the past, the love letter. And
Oh,
it's basically what you're talking about, probably what the knock box is too. It's a
mhm.
multi-page thing of listing all your professionals, where your documents are,
Yeah.
passwords, probably not the safest place to do that, but actually goes into what your wishes are for your memorial and your funeral and music and all of that. And yes, while it takes pretty long time maybe to fill out, and you certainly wouldn't do it all at once, but it really gets you again in that whole mindset of planning.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The peace of mind planner I showed does that. It's not mine. It's just one that I've found that is really comprehensive. And, you might not want to write all your passwords down, but having a password manager is really important, I believe. And making sure that someone else knows the master password for that.
Yeah.
Because our lives are so digital at this point that if you can't get into that, that vault of information, it's pretty hard to shut down everything and stop you can stop credit cards and so on, but still that residue is going to continue there.
Looks like we have a hand up from Cecilia.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Johanna. That was amazingly good.
Oh, thank you.
Um, yeah. And do you ever mention the transfer upon death document, the Todd document?
Yeah, I don't have really time to go into that, and I'm not a legal expert or a financial expert, as I mentioned. So it's best to consult with a professional to make sure those are in the correct format.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say is we're talking about the age of digital communication, and what I found very intriguing is that I don't think many people are aware that they're like for Facebook, you can memorialize that and
Yeah,
designate a loved one that will go and close your account or do whatever.
yeah, exactly. I've designated my daughter as my account manager. And yeah, because it can be really disconcerting to see somebody's account come up and it's their birthday, and they've been gone for months or years. And then people are wishing them a happy birthday, and that they're no longer with us. So
That would be
yes,
that would be probably the most innocent, but it can be duplicated. People, if it's
right.
open to
There's
public, it could be a disaster. Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely risks associated with keeping those accounts.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
All right, are there any other questions from the group for our speaker, Joanna?
Looks like we have a comment from Kat, says Johanna's workshop on heart wills is wonderful. And then thank you for sharing your.
Yes, I do offer a variety of workshops. And so if you have a group that you would like to talk to me about doing something with, I just put a link in the chat to my Calendly link to schedule that call with me. So feel free to look at my calendar and see when we might have a chance to talk.
Mhm.
Perfect. Well, Joanna, thank you so much for joining us in Financial Insights with our Wisdom with Women series and kicking off our first one in 2024. We have 3 more coming your way throughout the year, so follow your email and our newsletters to see our next speakers. This will be recorded and will be available both on our website and also on some of our social media. Joanna will also have access to it. And if you think of any questions after this session that you'd like to forward to Joanna, she's put a link. You can also reach out to us via email and we'll get your information over to Joanna as well. So thank you all for joining us. And this will conclude our Wisdom with Women with Johanna Munson, Peace of Mind Guide. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
everybody. Yeah, pleasure.
Take care. Happy spring.
Yeah.